Quran is unmarked. I didn't mark that, but the relationship continued, and I'm sorry to say, I don't know that I got anywhere with him, but I feel like you're a friend.
Yeah.
I hope that God convinced him somewhere down the line. Next time I see him,
Yeah.
he'll be a Christian.
Definitely a call for us to continue praying for him. And then also, this is why we also want to prepare, because we're going to get thrown questions. If we have curveball, they're going to seem like they're curveballs, like we would never expect that kind of question, no matter how much we train. But it's also a good reason to train a little bit more, to get to know the person a little bit more. But one of the things, or at least their worldview a little bit more, but one of the things we never really want to do is just kind of wing it. We never want to just make up a concept like, oh, God's okay with that, or, you know, I think this is what it is, because they can always come back and, like you said, you did research in the Quran, and they can come in and say, I think you were not honest with me this last time we were together, so you're going to kind of ruin trust, but also you can ruin our witness too. So yeah, you couldn't have said it better.
One of the things I remember that he brought up to me, because I brought it up to him, was, how many of y'all know who Lou Alcindor is?
Mm-hmm.
But you know who Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is?
Oh, yes.
That was Lou Alcindor.
Oh.
When he first started college, then during this period of time, a lot of them were changing their names.
Cassius
Clay
Clay.
was, later became Muhammad Ali. Well, during that period of time, I told him, I said, well, what is it that so many blacks are going to Islam? And he said, because Christ has been pictured as a white man.
Mm-hmm.
That got me, oh my God. It like somebody threw an arrow into my heart. I said, do you realize that Christ was Jewish?
Mm-hmm.
I said, now look at the Jews, and you tell me if they're white. Well, yeah, I know that some of them are, but not all of them, okay? So I dismissed that idea, but that was one of the reasons I was into that discussion with him, was because he had been a Christian and he went back to Islam, and I saw that happening time and time again. And God only knows how many Christians we lost that way.
Yes, Miranda.
So, my concern is, I've been listening to podcasts about divine hiddenness, but how do we answer questions from non-believers or believers about why God doesn't physically appear, manifest himself to us?
Well, good question. We're about to cover that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a wonderful question. And for you, I guess we can cover a little bit in the advanced class. We're going to cover with cultural apologetics to the Muslim community, and there's some very good pointed topics that we can cover with the premises that you're talking about, with why a lot of the African American community switched to Islam back, and it was really heavy in the 60s and 70s, and
Right.
still is to a degree up to this day. And it's something we're going to cover if you're interested, but it's
Yes.
actually not that difficult, and it is still a worldview question. It's not even a theological question, as you're finding out.
Well, in studying the word, you realize that it all stems back to Abraham, Sarah, and
Ishmael?
Hagar.
Oh.
Hagar. That's where it all started. Yeah, Ishmael and Isaac, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we come back to the same question, and that is, why not Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
If you believe in Abraham, that's Jesus' forefather.
You already see there's a barrier there, so
There-
we have to break down that barrier.
And they break that because of the Jewish community, but again, that's extracurricular, that has nothing to do with the lineage. God even said that, don't worry, Hagar, I'm gonna take care of that boy, and from him, there's gonna be a great nation.
I kind of believe that Islam is a manifestation of that. That great nation that was prophesied, but they got the story wrong as to which nation is greater, you know? He says that, I could remember the scripture wrong, but is there's gonna be a great nation and his children will fight against.
There'll be a war.
Yes, there'll be a war.
And it's been going on for ages, because the
Right.
progenitors of modern Islam would be your Nabateans, they'd be
Right.
your Moabites, and they've been constantly at war
Right.
with the nation of Israel. So it's something that's, we can see a theological and historiological premise for it, but then we still have to break that little, that barrier, no matter what. We have the history,
Yes.
we have the theological backing, but ultimately we have to break down this, it seems like typically a psychological barrier that's gonna be standing in the way. And I didn't mean to cut you off, Rachel, as long as you finish.
Oh, I mean, even Joseph was sold to Ishmaelites.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you off, forgive me.
Okay.
And
Go ahead.
I'll let you know when I better stop.
Yeah, I wanna get us back on track, because otherwise we're gonna be here till like midnight.
Because I have to follow up on that.
Yeah.
Order the
Right.
pizza now.
So,
Just in case.
So there's a great book, if you ever want to read a wonderful book that's full of wonderful, great Christian theological and philosophical insights. Blaise Pascal, as a mathematician back in the 17th century, wrote a book called His Pensées, and got a wonderful little statement here. He goes, God is willing to appear openly to those who seek him with all their heart, and to be hidden from those who flee from him with all their heart. There's enough light for those who only desire to see, and enough obscurity for those who have a contrary disposition. And that's what we're going to be working with, is that contrary disposition. So, a lot of apologetics, when you study into it, it's all about trying to provide evidence, right? But a ton of evidence doesn't necessarily lead people to seeking God and repentance. That's going to be something that only the Holy Spirit can convict, and it's our job at that point in time to be able to deliver it's basically a long cumulative case argument. We're going to be starting off with one argument, and the next argument with the next argument. And as I said, Beverly and Alvis had already touched base with where this is going. But unless somebody has a miracle, like an actual miracle in their life, or a series of miracles, which I think we all may have encountered those in our times, the evidence we're going to be presenting is going to be continually going back and trying to work with these objections that people hold, rather than we're going to be covering more ground and breaking down their objections than we are going to be and just presenting a strong case. We'll be able to present our cases. As the Christian, we're always the defendant. Going back to this courtroom analogy. So they're going to give you their case, and we're going to cross-examine it, and then from there, we'll be able to present the case of the gospel. So, and this is the issue that these are going to be some responses we can answer to this problem of divine hiddenness. Are they looking for the right God? And what kind of God we have in mind will shape the kind of evidence we have in mind. And this is the people we're going to be dealing with. Some people have this concept of God as, and we talked about this last week, absentee landlord. He just did creation and kind of let it run on cruise control ever since. Or some people have this objection of a God as a wrathful God. Some have the objection of the duality of the wrathful God in the Old Testament and the loving God is represented as Christ in the New Testament. So most of the time, people are looking for God, and I'm going to touch into a little bit of philosophy here, into a certain category of knowledge, this propositional knowledge. Most people who don't have a relationship with God only know God is supposed to be omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. So they're going to ask, okay, with all this, all loving, all good. So they know his characteristics. And then knowing his characteristics, they apply to the world. Okay, why then do we not see this God as we know him here in the world? And instead of having a personal relationship with him, so that's another type of knowledge that we could have. You could have knowledge of, I can have all the knowledge in the world of my wife that I can read in books, but I'll never know her as a person until I actually sit down and have a relationship with her.
I think that kind of goes along with what I've been sitting here thinking about. I think an important part of this discussion with someone like that is, are you asking for God to reveal himself to the world or for him to reveal himself to you.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's for the world, it ain't happening.
Yeah.
His revelation is already out here. We got the stars. We got the sun that comes up every single morning.
Yeah.
Grass still grows from the seed. Corn still grows and it's good for us.
Yeah.
After all these thousands of years. But if you're asking for yourself, then be an honest seeker.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're gonna run into this issue. Well,
They're not wanting to, sorry.
Well, that's the point. If you don't know which side of that you're addressing, you can't even use apologetics effectively.
you're gonna be running into the issue with non-believers that you'll be running into, that they present of us, constant case of projection. Most people present Christians as being these holier than thou. You all think you are doing such great work for the world when you're only thinking about yourself. You're only using this as a crutch, like a psychological tool.
God has gaps.
In a way, but more of a fear of death, because we're going to get into the existential argument here in a little bit. The interesting thing is, non-believers will be just, if not worse, in this idea of piety. Like, I'm actually thinking of this God and how he would present himself to the world, rather than I'm thinking of God in this conception I have of him. I'm thinking God should do this for the world. And once you hear that word should, or ought to, then you're talking about, you're getting into moral grounds, and then they always project out to the world. Not always, I don't want to make a mischaracterization. There's some people who honestly will say I've got a psychological barrier, but then you have this moral pietism, like if God was who he is, he would be as good as I think he should be.
Right.
So they're moralizing about this image of God that they're thinking he ought to be, rather than the God who actually is. So
Not only that, but you'll run into people who tell you that they're looking for, truth or absolute truths, and yet it can be absolute truth as long as it isn't God.
Yes.
Or an absolute truth they like.
yeah, so this
Yeah.
is
As long as
presuppositions.
it fits within their preconceived ideas.
Which of course will be a God of their own making, which is,
Exactly.
There
So
are also people with just theological commitment issues.
indeed, and this is exactly what we're working with. You said preconditions, you said commitments. We're going to be constantly working with presuppositions, what people are bringing to the table, because we're going to be coming to working with people in an apologetical sense, and we're going to lay our cards on the table. Trust that they'll want to play the game with us and lay their cards on the table. Now we have to see how we're going to play the game once they have their presuppositions put out in place. So I think I covered this. I also recommend y'all look up the scriptures. All these premises I'm going to be working with here all have scriptural backing. But we're looking at the idea of God being a personal God, a God who wants to have a relationship with us. But God requires a lot of us, especially a morally serious God. And this is the interesting thing. So we were talking about the moral conceptions that people will present that God should have, but then the idea that they know or may have a knowledge, or we can present the knowledge that God also has moral demands of us. And these moral demands are quite very high. And typically they're going to be outside of what a non-believer would want to commit to. The idea of, I can get this idea, this propositional God, this God is all great, all knowing, all good. But the moment that I have some sort of moral obligations to him, then I'm like, I'm not having that. That's going to be a little bit more than I can hold. And that's honestly one of the biggest barriers that we're going to be running into in dealing with people who don't believe is most people want the accountability to run one way. God is accountable to me, I am not accountable to God.
Have any of y'all, are any of y'all familiar with Rosario Butterfield?
Yes, I do. She was the head of the Planned Parenthood, I do believe.
Well, she was a college professor,
Oh, different.
and she was a lesbian and an atheist too. And she wrote a scathing article about an evangelical organization, Promise Keepers. So this pastor contacted her, and they started a dialogue together and invited her for dinner. And through his witness and this relationship, she came to saving faith. And at the same time, she realized that the God she had been introduced to her, there was no way she could keep this lesbian relationship going. So she realized that God was who he said he was, but she had to abandon all of her lifestyle, everything in order to follow Christ. But through that, the Holy Spirit had convicted her of that, and of course now she's wife, mother, and Christian author. But through that relationship.
Had a pastor, I think his wife was friends with the other person I was thinking of, who was the head of Planned Parenthood, and in a similar regard converted to Christianity and realized that all of her work was, and I was mixing the names, so forgive me on that. But that's, Rosaria Butterfield is a wonderful example. And there's a large amount of people who were ardent atheists, famous too, who have later converted, and it's not been anything relatively new. It stretches back centuries. So this is something that we have historical, and even very recently historical. I think Butterfield was in the last 6-7 years, right? So we have proof that our methods work. That as long as we adhere to our convictions, we have a very good, loving relationship with the person we're attending to. This isn't just academic work we're doing. This is actual feet on the ground work, and we will praise. If God so chooses, he will work through us, and we will be able to have some fruits for our efforts, for our labors here. So the answer to the previous issue of this creating an image of God, but also not wanting to have a God that has any moral obligations that we have moral obligations to, it does require that we be humble, we be grateful. And trying to think where I went through these slides and I had something to say on all this, but I think this is one of the things I love about y'all. Y'all covered ground before I ever get to it. So I'm going I don't know if I just need to skip ahead on this one. So this is basically covers the ground. We're not in the position, no created being is in the position to insist on what God's obligated to do. But that's something that we're going to have to be working with here. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. The will of God sorry, I'm not reading well tonight. The will is a critical factor in the knowledge of God. When we use the analogy of parents staying hidden from their children, a more apt analogy would be adult children rather than those of tender age. And we must also recognize the fundamental matter of human pride and rebellion, more relevant for humans than children. In other words, the analogy that we are rebellious adults or petulant teenagers is a good and better analogy to start working with. We want to, because we see this common theme of the idea of basically ditching God out of our life because of the concept of moral obligation. I had a similar, but much more darker issue with my life. It wasn't because I wanted to justify a lifestyle. I just wanted creation to end. I wanted there to be nothing. I became a very big nihilist, and the only way I could ever have the concept of what I thought was peace being non-existence was God couldn't be there. So this is something that we're going to be working with here, and it hits at every single spectrum. It's not going to just be somebody trying to justify their lifestyle. A lot of times it's going to be just out of sheer despair. So we can't walk in with our preconception that, okay, you just want to justify your lifestyle. It may be something far more deeper than that, because once you've ditched God out of your life, then everything's morally open to you. And we're going to be covering more into moral arguments later, but we're going to be dealing with different types of moralities that the world works with compared to as how we see morality as Christians. We're talking about objective morality. We're also going to be talking about different types of morality that we're going to be running into in the world. So I'm trying to cut through a lot of this so we can get up to the point, because it looks like we already dove in deep into the pool. So if you want to go and read through this really quickly, the idea of how God's absence may make things clearer for us. In a way, it's an argument that we can have. There are certain arguments for evil that we can state where God allows evil for character building, but also God may allow his hiddenness to give us deeper appreciations for him, to give us greater senses of dependency, determination to obey God, to encourage gratitude, and to help us realize sin's disastrously negative consequences. It's ultimately what we're going to be working with here is the concept of sin, and that is the intrinsic nature of the gospel. So now we're going to be looking for positive evidence of how we can present God to those who say, why is a good God hidden from us? And we're going to be dealing with, sorry for all the big 5-letter words, but we're going to be dealing with, for aesthetic reasons, we have a knowledge of what beauty is. It seems like almost an intrinsic, inherent knowledge. We know what ugly is. We typically know that follows signs of death and chaos and destruction, but we also know what beauty is. We know we have an inbuilt sense of awe when we see a sunset, when we see the Grand Canyon, when we see a baby born or grandchildren born. We see the stars on a nice country night like we have where we live. So you gotta ask yourself, where does that sense of beauty come from? If there is no objective standard for beauty, that means anything can really truly be beautiful. But we start seeing that today in some postmodern work, but I would say that most people inherently have a belief that stuff just doesn't cut it for good art. I don't know about you, even when I was a non-believer, I just thought that stuff was garbage. I don't know if you've seen modern art these days where it just seems like people having convulsions over a table or throwing together some random stuff out of the garage together, gluing it together and calling it a sculpture. But not to be disparaging to their work, but we look at it and we don't see the beauty in there. And I've even had artists explain to me their work, and it just doesn't make it. I can see their point, what they're trying to communicate, but the work doesn't communicate to what they're trying to do. So evidence can also be existential reasons. We have everybody searches for some sort of meaning in their lives. Why is my life significant? Why was I born? What's my purpose in life? And especially in terms of having an inherent moral sense that we need to be forgiven for our wrongdoings in our life. There could be philosophical and scientific arguments, which I could really nerd up on with y'all, but I'm just going to give you that as a bullet point right now. Re-enchantment of the world. So we're living in probably 5 centuries of modernism, where we as human beings have been reduced to nothing but sacks of protein, carbon-based life. We're nothing but this matter. There's nothing more inherently valuable to us, even though the world views human life as being inherently valuable, as in human rights, and that's what all laws are purportedly set to defend. But what is this life that we're trying to defend? Is there something more significant than just a beating heart and electrical signals in our neurons in the brain? So we also have the powerful evidence of the Christian community, the way we love each other. That definitely reflects God in a huge way, especially if we're doing it right. I know we as Christians don't always do that right, but when done right, that is a huge piece of evidence to show the presence of God. We can all have that view of the installation of communion up in the upper room as a good background for that, but we also have the impact that Christianity's had throughout history that's led up to every single, this is the funniest thing, so you end up having most people who have objections objections to Christian morality try to build a case over objective morality built on this idea of, what's the word I'm looking for, the Enlightenment values that have evolved and have become the bedrock for all laws, all progress, whether it be economic, whether it be political progress, education, eradication of diseases. But they always want to undercut the fact that all those premises that were the Enlightenment was built upon are Christian premises. And the powerful figure of the historical Jesus, I don't think there is anywhere in the world that hasn't had at least some exposure to modern culture doesn't have a conception of Jesus. There may be some people in an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean.
There is.
Yeah, it's North Sentinel Island, but everybody else has some sort of conception of who Jesus is, and at most you'll get something similar to what we hold to, but at least you get he was a good moral teacher, and probably if not the best moral teacher. And then also one of our biggest issues in dealing with divine hiddenness, or dealing with an apologetical arguments, is the problem of evil. It's also a very powerful tool for us to provide evidence for a hidden God. And we're going to get into that in the problem of evil, and you guys are going to be like, okay, how does a good God allow for evil in the world if he is perfectly good? But that is something that will ultimately point to him. So, I know we're just tearing through these slides, but I want to be able to do this. And I know you're not a fan of N.T. Wright, but he does put out some good quotes that we can use for our purposes. So, the four basic needs, sorry, my tongue's not working. The four basic needs belief in God satisfies: the longing for justice, the quest for spirituality, the hunger for relationships, and the delight in beauty. And this fact prompts us to consider a holistic or integrated approach as we engage in philosophical reasoning and apologetics. And these are all matters of existential desires that we have in the human heart. And this is something that we're going to want to work with in our day-to-day apologetical work. We don't even have to like saying, okay, hey, this is who I'm going to be working my apologetic work in. Like say somebody who the God has sent you to, but it's something that you can work with, because as Christians, for some odd reason, you let them know you're a Christian, they're going to come out with some sort of existential question, some sort of why is my niece suffering? And a lot of times it comes up very negatively, but this is a very good introduction into the line of questioning. Why do you feel like that something has gone wrong? Why do you think God has been unfair? Why are you making this characterization? How do you even have this concept of what right and wrong is, but delivered in a loving manner? But it's something that we can point to as inherent in the human heart. So beliefs represent the way the world is, and desires represent the way we want the world to be. So now we're typically working with beliefs informed by desires. As in with Rosaria Butterfield, who had a desire for a certain lifestyle choice, reoriented their beliefs around that one desire. And this is something that we're going to want to do, is we're going to be apologetical sleuths. We have to find what desire this person has. A desire for justice, whether it be for a family member that died a horrible death, or something that had happened to them in their own life. A desire for reconciliation, for holding on to, say, horrible choices that they had made in life, and they may feel that they're unreconcilable to any kind of a deity. And these are things we're going to be needing to be very sensitive to. So, and excuse me. So a successful belief is one that fits the world. It is true. And we're going to be dealing with this concept of truth and its correspondence to the beliefs in later classes, but a successful desire is one that the world makes fit. It is fulfilled. So many people have unfulfilled desires, and they're searching for a God, and they typically find it in some other avenue, whether it be sexual gratification, drugs, drinking, and many other things. We would call those idols as Christians, but they're looking for a deep desire of the heart to be fulfilled in some way. And we have to learn to point them that desire leads to God. And once you are able to reorient a person's set of desires, their beliefs will follow. And that's where we come in with the reconstructive part of apologetics. And both the evidential and existential offer coherent, holistic array of pointers to God. It's a twofold. The evidential is going to be the medicine we give once we get the diagnosis from the existential portion of our apologetics. So, excuse me. Now we're getting into some arguments. So the syllogism is just basically a normal set of an argument with premises leading to a conclusion. So when we're dealing with existential reasoning, we're going to find out that people have a profound and inescapable longing for forgiveness, or relief of fear of death, etc. I also find that God in Christ provides us forgiveness, whereas atheism and other worldviews don't afford this conclusion. Therefore, I would be justified in believing in God. So, our problem as apologists is getting from this premise to the conclusion And this is where we have to reorient the desires towards, is this concept that God in Christ provides forgiveness, or provides the desire, this existential desire of the heart that everybody's seeking. This is a very important issue we run into. Does anybody have any questions, any, say, experience in dealing with people who've come up to you with some very deep, profound, just drama, tragedy, you name it, that they're going through in their life, deep questions, seeking God but finding X, Y, or Z?
Yes.
Yes, okay, Carol?
No, I was speaking with a 16-year-old young man about why he has difficulty believing in God. He stated, why does evil exist? Why do babies die? Why does war happen? Famine, pestilence, all these things. And he goes, so he goes, I guess I'm wondering why bad things happen to good people. So that's what I ran into.
You mind if I ask how you answered him?
Yeah. I went up to him, I told him, well, you're asking the wrong question.
Okay, good.
You're asking why bad things happen in a fallen world. Bad things happen. I told him the question he needs to ask is, why do good things happen?
It's a good answer, yes.
So, we have a loving Father up in heaven that, especially towards Christians, that bad things, it rains on the just and the unjust alike. So that whenever good things happen, it's obviously from God. It's not a manifestation of what we want. It's evidence of what God has given, and in any instance in which something good happened, it was grace. Us getting something we didn't deserve. So that's how I explain it.
That's a wonderful, wonderful answer. There's an interesting way you could frame it, because your answer was more of the remedy, the pill, and what we want to do is get the diagnosis. A really good question when somebody comes up, why do bad things happen? Where do you get your concept? This is a question. Where do you get your concept of good or bad from? I mean, without any kind of a God, any concept of good or bad is a construct either out of culture, out of your own insight into what you think the world ought to be. You're talking about morality here. Where do you define the good? If we're in a strictly evolutionary world, the only thing that is good is the propagation of our species.
Yeah, well, the reason I did it the way I did, because this young fellow had knowledge. He had Christian knowledge of Christ. He had read the Bible. He had read the Bible. So, if I was talking to an atheist, I would probably come up with the same answer. However, at that point, they would have to borrow from some sort of worldview in order for an atheist. They would have to borrow from any worldview other than atheism to get a concept of what they deem either good or bad, or good or evil.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, working with deconstructed Christians is difficult, but you at least have the groundwork. But they already have a series of objections that led them to where they're at, and still a lot of the same arguments hold that you need to define. This is why I'm always asking you, what do you mean by? You have to get somebody to define their terms. A lot of people, when they talk to you, and as I do now, I'm communicating terms to you that unpackage huge amounts of other information. So I can say something to you like, I believe that the sky is blue, and then you have to get definitions of what do you mean by sky, what do you mean by blue, and you can literally tear those concepts apart into packaging this whole concept of blueness and the whole concept of what is a sky. But you want to find, when people are talking to you, these little signs of issues, these little signs of their concerns, their desires. So their desire is that they want to know why there is evil in the world. Define evil, you have to define what is good. You can't have a standard of evil without a standard of good. And from there, you have a little bit of room to start working. You can get them to define what their conception of good and evil is, and then start rebuilding it as you already did with being able to, the redemptive value of the gospel at that point. So,
Mark Middlebird's book deals with some of that in the first chapter, and I
Yes, sir.
feel like more is coming, so.
yeah, it's gonna be,
He starts working on it in the last half of the chapter, so you wouldn't.
Yeah, I only read up to page 27.
That's
I didn't
okay,
pass
that's okay.
that.
I'm not giving you all,
I know you are.
yeah, I'm not giving you all a pop quiz here, but, yeah. All right.
City, I don't believe in good people.
You know, neither do I, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't believe in good people, I believe that we're all essentially evil.
Amen.
At our base.
Yeah, we
But there are people who make less bad decisions than others.
Yeah, some animals are less equal than each other, or less equal
Some
than each
dogs
other.
bite,
What's that?
some dogs bite.
Indeed. So, what we're looking at here, so in this conclusion, what we're looking for is, therefore I'd be justified in believing in God. What we're trying to look for is some sort of a justification. And justification is just a quick little premise on how we get to know things, and I don't want to nerd it up too much on it. It's the only bridge we have between what is in the world and what it is that we know. We have to have some sort of a bridge between that. So our bridge is going to be, in justification, is justification of God, God's character, and their knowing Him. So I don't want to get too deep into that study because, yeah, it's how we can know things is a very difficult topic to cover, but ultimately it's what we're wanting to do is to be able to get a justification bridge between knowledge and what actually God is. And you're going to find out that typically there's something in between there that's blocking people from wanting to actually have that knowledge of God, or they may even have a misinformed knowledge of God. So, and this is a wonderful little apologetical tool. It's basically a gambler's, what do you call it? Not a fallacy.
bet?
It's a bet. This is
Oh,
game.
bluff?
Yeah, in essence, but it's just game theory applied to Christianity. And I remember somebody brought up game theory last week. I don't remember who it was. I think it was Larry. So Pascal and his pensées brought this up. If God exists and I believe in God, I'll go to heaven, which is infinitely good. If God exists and I don't believe in God, I may go to hell, which is infinitely bad. If God does not exist, then whether I believe in God or not, whatever I gain or lose would be finite, so I should believe in God. So this basically presents that our bets are better in believing in God. Believing in God. We, in not believing in God, risk an infinity of eternal torment according to the Scripture. But also believing in God, we have an infinity of perfect union with God in heaven. So the bet is what little sacrifice you have to do in believing in God is worth an infinity in heaven. So did anybody kind of get the concept of you wanting to lay a bet out on the table? Are you wanting to play this deck of cards because you don't think that the hand that you're going to lose?
Well, with my worldview, I would disagree with that.
What's that?
Well, so my worldview, I would disagree with
How
that.
so?
Well, I mean, even Satan believes in God.
Of course.
So believing in God, I'll go to heaven, which is infinitely good.
Mm-hmm.
But
If God exists and I don't believe in God, then you're in the same exact position as you were before. You just happen to not believe.
Mm-hmm.
But you'd have to believe in Satan too then.
Not
See,
necessarily.
from what
I know
you're saying,
plenty of people
from-
believe in God, don't believe in the devil.
Well, I'm saying that,
Plenty.
you're saying even Satan believes in God.
The demons.
And that's because we know the word of God and it says that's where Satan came from.
Mhm.
But somebody that doesn't believe in God, they don't believe in Satan either.
Oh, I agree.
So
I'm just
that-
saying that somebody could believe in God and still go to hell.
Oh,
They still go to hell?
definitely.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Belief in God is irrelevant.
Theologically, believing in God won't get you into heaven.
That's
Yeah.
right.
All right, okay, now we're bridging the concepts here of belief, the two different types of knowledge.
Yeah,
Do we even believe in God as a set of propositions, or do we believe in God as a person?
As a person.
Okay, so let's operate this word belief as believe in God as a person. To believe in God as a person typically means some sort of divine revelation, whether through His word, our hearts being convicted, so on and so forth.
So what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So we're talking about belief as
see,
not
the
as that.
devil is real.
And the biggest trick he had was to convince the world he does not exist. So it's kind of interesting. We have to convince the world that that God exists, you know, in a way, or
No, I think it was, the way the saying goes in it is, the greatest lie the devil ever told or ever perpetuated on mankind was convincing them that he didn't exist.
Exactly.
That Satan didn't exist.
So you've got an inversion going on there, you know, that, yeah, it's something I'd like to tease out later, but I find it interesting that Satan desires hiddenness where God desires to be known, especially to those he chooses, so.
And then too many people, he's the great imitator, so anything that God does, he tries to imitate in some form or another. And that sways a lot of people.
I've got a theory that'll blow your mind.
Okay?
But I'll give it after class.
Yeah.
Just remind me of it. But
Okay.
Yeah, I don't wanna run us too late tonight.
That
Go ahead.
reminded me of Screw Tape Letters that
Mhm.
are on a, what was it, Banter? Banter? I don't know. Yeah, I think it was Banter. It's just a perversion of good humor,
Oh, dude.
according to Lewis.
Yeah, well, I can get into screw tape letters, but I wanna get us back on track here. Yeah. So this kind of gives you the actual meaning of the argument. It depends on whether the expected value of believing in God, which we use to make a decision if we're not certain whether God exists. It's a gambler's tool that we can use, but I like Pascal's wager for us is it gives us a little more, gives more assurance that we can give, but yeah, I'm trying to really think about how it would be when we're trying to have a certain apologetical discourse with somebody. I think once you have somebody who's right on the cusp of wanting to believe, it's a good tool to be able to knock them over the edge, but it's not something that you're going to be able to lead with and say like, hey, why don't you just bet in God? It almost seems like a bad, what do you call it? Some of the
Opposition.
bad, well, no, just some of the bad Christian movies like, come on, Jesus, yo.
Yeah, right.
So,
Jesus loves you, man.
yeah.
Hey, bro.
Jesus.
But the thing is, what we have is we're building a toolkit. We don't have a single one of these arguments that really have a grand slam capability. We're going to be running the long game. We're going to be bunting. We're going to be running just single base hits here, you know.
Home runs don't usually win games.
They don't. Consistent gameplay does. Yes. All right.
It's the singles and the doubles that win.
Well, if you got somebody on the ropes, go for the knockout.
Well, sure, but.
And I mean that in a
That's
gentle
the
and
home run.
respectful way. I'm not saying that like, to decimate them. I mean, kindly.
That's the home
if you
run.
can.
Well,
Yeah.
it's like what the old thing about I guess it was a Facebook thing, but it was a Christian, talking to an atheist, and just say, okay, well, let's just say that you're right. So if I've lived my life for Christ, and I've lived in peace, and I've had this kind of life, and I've enjoyed my life, what have I lost? If there's nothing out there, I've lost nothing, because I've had a good life here on earth, believing in Christ that you say doesn't exist. But if I'm right, and you're wrong, what's
then
gonna
you have
happen? Then
you have
you've got that eternity
exactly.
in hell.
And honestly, a lot of people who I've talked to, and myself included at the time, would have been more than willing to trade that. And it's pretty bad, but in order to do that, and that was one of the biggest reasons why I would say Pascal's wager only works later on down in the relationship is a lot of people dispense with God because they want to be able to maintain this lifestyle, but some people just want God gone because they don't want to be accountable to anything, but also just the concept of, let's put this.
They want their sin to remain acceptable, I would say.
In a way, but that's just going to be moral accountability. In order to, I would say a lot of people have the concept of wanting to have a death to self. In other words, and then you'll run into this in screw tape letters, the whole destructive concept of what screw tape or Wormwood's doing with his patient is, I think I backwards, but is the ultimate concept of the destruction of the individual. To be able to take away any kind of concept of value of the individual. That the end would be that the person wants destruction for their lives. I don't know how to better put that without using. This is, for me, it's very personal, so it's kind of hard. I wanted an end to existence. Some people want to be able to get to that point. And once you've devalued your own self to that point where you want everything to end, then what this flesh does is immaterial anymore, yeah. It is just another tool to use for spending the last amount of time you have in this existence trying to find whatever momentary pleasure you have. So it runs a lot more deeper and darker than just justifying that, but some people have already justifying their behavior, but some people have already made such a deep commitment to falling, where even the concept of heaven becomes something they don't want to have because they want to remain in the darkness. And
So what were you think? Just total hopelessness and not
we're running into this hugely into the culture these days. We have
hopelessness and just total not.
Yes.
It's one reason suicides among teens is up like astronomically in the last few years, because we're dealing with
And vets.
a lot of mental health things in our training to try to help.
And also the spread of euthanasia in a lot of the other Western world. You have people who claim they didn't ask to be born. Why am I even here? This existence is bleak and I just want it gone. I would be willing to sacrifice existing just due to this sheer existential dread that they deal with on a daily basis. And so yeah, maybe we should have put Pascal's wager there at the end, honestly, because we're getting into some dark territory, but this is something we're going to be dealing with. And as Elsie said, we're going to be dealing with people who are maybe nearly suicidal, if not already having ideations or may have attempted suicide before in their life. So, okay, so we've gotten really dark and really real there, but this is something we're going to need to contend with. This is, as I said, we're going to be dealing with, as I said in the last class, we're going to be dealing with some heavy stuff, especially for us in our faith. We're going to be having people pour their hearts out to us. That's actually going to be, wow, that is actually evil you've encountered. How do I then, as a believer, account for that before I even can attend to you? Wow, this is profoundly hitting me so hard that I need to take some time in prayer and reflection.
I was going to say offer hope.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy. I can remember in the 90s with Dr. Kevorkian and then with Hillary Clinton, and those were two main issues. Was in 93 when Hillary Clinton got up and said, hey, these abortions are going to be, affordable, safe, and rare. These are reproductive rights. And then, so therefore it devalued life. And then you had Kevorkian and him saying, well, everybody has a right to end their life with, dignity. And that made life cheap. And so now that and it's crazy because it actually what ended up happening, as you say, a deconstruction of the value of life. And once people lose that value, that inherent value to existence of life, that's whenever you come into that, I'm a burden on society, I'm a burden on my family, why do I even exist? If there's anything beyond this, it's gotta be better than what I'm going through now.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about with the re-enchantment of the world, where we went from the value of a human life being infinitely valuable due to being an image of God to being, on one hand, the most valuable thing is human rights say so, and then the other hand, infinitely invaluable because what do we have to attend to? Our existence is
Oh yeah,
just...
I think, and the crazy thing is, the most perplexing thing I've ever heard was, what about these children? Whenever they talk about and I'm not getting political, but I'm just saying, the children that come across the border, the same folks that are, well, we need our reproductive rights, and then these kids being put in cages at the border, Well, what about the kids?
Yeah.
You know, and of course, nobody's really gonna care too much now because they devalued life.
Yeah, and even to the point where, within the abortion argument, where they're talking about people who are gonna be born into poverty and destitution, it would be better just them to not have existed, or born with severe
Down
mental and
syndrome
physical
or something.
handicaps, yeah.
Wasn't that kind of the original abortion argument?
And indeed it was espoused in eugenics.
That was the original.
Oh, I can remember the names, the lady's name.
Margaret Sanger.
Yeah,
Margaret Singer, yeah. Who, and her biggest thing was, getting rid of the black population.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't it Hispanic, right?
Hmm?
Wasn't it also the Hispanic population?
She was in New York City,
She-
so it
yeah,
would've been a little
It
bit-
would have been more with Harlem, she was wanting to, but yeah, I mean, it definitely grew into that. I mean, you go into New York City, 2016, and then this will be the end of it, but going to 2016, the amount of abortions that occurred in New York City in 2016 outnumbered, for blacks, outnumbered the amount of births that blacks had in New York City in 2016.
You wanna say-
Yeah, it's mind blowing. It
Yeah.
blows your mind.
Best way I've seen it espoused is it's a genocide of our time, and just below,
Holocaust?
well, actually it's above that, it's just below China's Cultural Revolution death toll, and but even though their abortion death count's even higher than that, so if you add ours with theirs, it's the highest
Well, I'm sure.
body count for genocide in
Yeah.
history. So, yeah, so back and getting back on track here, but there's some deep stuff, and I want to thank you for that insight there. So we're going to be getting into cosmological arguments here. This is what we're talking about with general revelation here, but we're also going to be talking about it in the concept of just philosophical insight here. So we're talking about, this is Thomas Aquinas. I know many people might not agree due to his theology, but he was a very, very astute philosopher, and he came up with a wonderful argument for God, and by basically saying we observe that things are in motion, we recognize that everything which is in motion is moved by something else, but if that motion is itself in motion, then its motion must have been caused by something else. In other words, it's the argument out of, hey Rebecca.
Hi.
So this is what
Are you
Aquinas
just
is.
gonna sit there and eat all those? I just loaned y'all those.
Yeah, I was gonna say, why did he know that?
You know?
Oh, no, you're more than welcome. You're
Just
glad you
because I
came.
tried to share.
Yeah, see?
That's a
Yeah,
shame.
you missed all the tech issues we had at the
And
beginning.
Beverly, what's in that other one?
Do you have one of those handouts?
I've been listening
You ate all
for an hour
this?
now.
No!
Oh, really?
There were 2 cookies, but down here, so one for me and one for Alice.
Oh, you don't.
And none for Thomas.
She's got that.
I was like, I can imagine.
I know it's like a pretty girl shows up asking for a pen and all the dudes are like, here.
Some things never change, huh? So, what we're dealing with is the argument of, this argument deals with the concept of infinite regresses, right? He basically premises that anything that's in motion must have been put into motion by another cause. So every event requires a previous event ad infinitum, or you have to have somebody putting in motion some agent, some person, something. We would say that would be God, but the idea of infinite event causation breaks down with, let's say, modern scientific theory. Most people are going to be talking about, hey, what do you think about the Big Bang Theory? Well, at some point in time, the universe came to creation. Well, they may be wanting to, as we talked about earlier, present the multiverse theory as the idea that instead of there being, typically multiverse theory is some way to explain the concept of fine tuning, but where we're able to present the cosmological argument is either you're stating that there was an infinite series of other universes that led up to this universe. Well then, what created that universe? And it's also a great argument for, this is a counter for what we're going to run into is when people ask us, so God created the universe, well, who created God? And then you end up having this regress of a God creating a God, creating a God, creating a God. And what this cosmological argument does is you have to put in a premise that at some point, something, and it's going to be an agent, meaning a person, had to begin this whole series of events. Because arguing for infinities, mathematical infinities are a total different thing, but the concept of an infinitesimal universe doesn't map well with science, for one. It doesn't map well with any kind of theory we have. Explaining the universe outside of even multiverse theory, because you're going to still break down into multiverse and multiverses. So this is a very good tool in using to counter the who created God argument and the such. I think I'm a little bit rambling here, so forgive me there. But that's what this argument's for. It's not a very good, like, bam, I've knocked this ball out of the park and now believe in God argument. Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to say. We're building up to a cumulative case here. We also have the poker analogy. Okay, you lay down 2 pairs. Well, let me lay down my full house, and that's going to hopefully trump your hand here. So now Leibniz. Now, he was a very smart dude. If you ever want to read his work into mathematics, it'll blow your mind. But he premised this argument: anything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. So if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. The universe exists, therefore the universe has an explanation for its existence. Therefore, the explanation of the existence of the universe is God. Come on in, Larry.
Oh, I'm dirty and sticking with doing firearms, sorry.
Oh, sit next to me. I love the smell of gunpowder.
No, not that. It was teaching how to take apart.
Oh, okay. Well, I love this. What was it, hops?
CLP.
No, it was CLR.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, nasty stuff.
If you want to sit next to me, you're more than welcome, Larry.
I was gonna catch the last one. Are you doing another one Sunday?
Not yet. I won't be rebooting this class for probably about another month.
I'll be back next time though. I'll be back next week.
Yeah, we are recording right now, so
Let's keep going. No, I don't want to interpret.
no
I'm
worries.
gonna listen.
Yeah, if you want to just pull out a chair out in the hall, you're more than welcome. What do you want to do?
I'll sit right.
All right, awesome. All right, so where were we? Leibniz's cosmological argument. So we're going back to this idea of the multiverse. So people present the multiverse as an answer to why is there this perfectly finely tuned universe. So what they do is they present what in philosophical term is called ontological bloat, right? You'll present this huge Rube Goldberg of an argument to account for why we have existence in the way we have it, why there was a big bang, what there was before the Big Bang, and why that we have intelligent life to exclude God. Or we can have the more parsimonious meaning, very simple, very tuned to what we know in common sense and the existence of the world, premise of that there was a God, an agent on the other side of this Big Bang that caused that initial push, the initial conditions that started the universe. And I know we touched into the concept of I'm brain dead there, the simulation hypothesis last week. And so if you have the premise of that the existence that we experience is merely a simulation that was created by a grand programmer somewhere, like you basically have somebody writing you into a video game. Well, that person sounds mightily a lot like God, if you ask me. So they...
Well, what they're stating now is that at the Big Bang is when, if there is a multiverse, if there is all these other cosmological events that have happened, they all occurred, they all were formed at this Big Bang, which of course would have been this large galactic universal size explosion.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, so then you still have an initial cause, an initial event. What happens before that? Now
are you going into what the book was stating with this, where...
I'm riffing off on my own stuff here. So
okay.
I want you all to keep the book as a frame of reference to, but...
Because, well, in the book, it actually, we still have, and I've heard Frank Turek, and not that I would recommend anybody to listen to what he says theologically, but apologetically, the guy's a
He's-
genius.
Yeah, he's also very conservative too, so which is good for our purposes.
But, oh no, I think as apologetically, I don't
Yeah,
think there's,
yeah.
I'm not even sure there's any better,
Yeah.
but the unmoved mover
Mhm.
to exist outside of your, and are you getting into this?
Yes,
Like,
that's what we're talking about right now, yeah.
no, I mean, are you gonna go further into it?
Yeah, because the unmoved mover is actually a step before Aquinas. That was actually Plato that was working with that argument.
Okay, so okay.
Yeah. So
I'll
what
go
I
back.
yeah, and I'm trying to remember where I was at with this point. So you're talking about the multiverse coming out of a single initial condition. Oh yeah, now I remember what I was going to talk about. So, and I said I'm going to be even quoting atheists here. There is a wonderful theoretical physicist by the name of Sabina Hassenfelder, very highly regarded, and she basically bluntly puts it that if you believe in anything you believe in before the data that we have for the Big Bang, which right now is like I think about somewhere about to the order of 40 like -47 milliseconds before the initial conditions of the Big Bang. Anything you believe before that, you're believing in religion. It's a metaphysical principle. You can't prove it. There is nothing that you can say that we can empirically prove by any kind of observations we've made in this universe. She rails other atheists for having these concepts of multiverses to be able to explain what's going on. She will call out the science of the gap. So I love her work in the fact that she will call out anybody who believes in anything before that condition. You're appealing to a supernatural principle. They'll say metaphysical, but it's still the same thing. So it's a good thing that you want to attend to. So somebody says, okay, I hold to a multiverse. Well, who created the multiverse, and how can you prove a multiverse? And you're talking about Frank Turek. He's got a wonderful book called "I Do Not Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist."
Yeah, I want to get that book.
Yeah, I got a copy if you want to read it.
Do you?
Yeah.
Oh wow, yes, I would love to read it.
So yeah, any premise that you have to build outside of what we can prove empirically to a scientist takes a measure of faith to believe in. And go ahead.
So with regards to the cosmological argument,
Leibniz, yeah.
Leibniz. So when an individual who's not a believer asks us, why do you believe in God? Would it be appropriate to ask them, okay, do you believe that the universe exists?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, I do. Okay. And if the universe exists, has an explanation for its existence, that explanation would be God. And then, of course, they would say, well, no, that's not necessarily true, but the universe exists, therefore there's an explanation for its existence, therefore the explanation of the existence of the universe is God. Would that be an appropriate, way to address their arguments against the existence of God?
In a way, it's a very good lead-in. But if you want to push a little bit further, okay, so you believe in the Big Bang? Yeah. All right, great. Do you understand some of the basic science behind it? This is the initial beginning of the universe. Okay, yeah, I do. Do you know about the multiverse theory? All that kind of cover grounds. Okay, ask them why they believe in this material. Typically what I do is I drill in. You're talking about this tough love. Have you read the scientific research on the matter? Well, no. Have you performed any experiments? Have you been out to any kind of large telescopes to be able to take in some of this data? Well, no. Well, how do you believe this? Well, I read it in a book, or I was taught it. So, okay, it's great. Okay, if you get them along these lines of questions, you're kind of backing them into a corner. And eventually, and this is what I've had happen, because I used to be the one saying this too. Why do you believe this? Because science. And once you get to that answer, you've got them. They can't explain any further, so they're appealing to
Your ignorance.
no science of the gaps. What you're talking
Science of
about
the gaps,
earlier. The scientific version of God of the gaps, where you run into an explanatory gap where you can no longer explain any of the premises. You just have to take as a measure of faith in what you believe in. So many people take as a measure of faith science because we're taught it from a young age in school, and we're having it reinforced throughout our life as being the highest way of learning, but they don't realize there's certain levels of faith that go into the understanding of what they understand. As I said, if you're reading it out of a book, you're trusting the authority of the people who wrote that book. Well, so do we. In our Bible, we have the same amount of authority reading our Bible and trusting its authority as somebody who believes in science has had all the books because they've not run the experiments. They know the names of the experimenters, perhaps if they paid attention in science class, but they only know maybe some surface level theory. And if you're talking to a hardcore scientist, if you're talking to somebody who's actually a very honest hardcore scientist, they'll actually agree. Yeah, okay, I don't know, but I'm putting my cards on the table on this. My chips on the table for this.
Yeah, because what they're doing is they're believing in an interpretation of what a scientist said about the science, not the actual science.
Indeed, yeah. We're going to get really deep in this, and we're covering the ground of scientism, because yes, there is a huge issue with the way science is actually performed, the way it's run in the academy, the way it's funded, the way it's, you name it. It is as fallible as anything else as there is. So, but yeah, this argument helps us break it apart. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say the big issue with saying, oh, I believe this because science, you know, I can't explain this, but science can. What scientists can tell you? Because the thing is that science is not a spiritual or physical entity. It is a study. It's just a study.
Methodologies.
And so, you know, Christians believe in science just as much as anyone. It's just we believe it's a study of God's creation. They believe it's a study of whatever you want to call the earth, or
The rules
the
that God put in
universe.
place to handle our
Right.
physical world.
So like you were saying, that gap, I believe it, I take this faith because my faith is in science.
Yes.
Your faith is in something,
Is in
in this
something.
case, there is no science. The study has not been put deep enough into this gap that we've come across.
Yeah, and that's one of the things you want to do, is you've defined scientism.
Right.
And you've got to be able to work with the person on how they believe in all these concepts. Why are they the best way of believing? And that's all scientism in its strong form. It is the only way that we can know anything. In its weak form, it's the best way we can know anything. So you have to be able to break down that argument is how is it that you can know anything through science? And the only way to address that is to address the methodologies. Like, okay, so science is predicated on empirical evidence. So that's basically anything that we can observe with our senses.
Right.
So you can automatically question, okay, are our senses completely trustworthy?
Right.
That's one of many ways, but we're going to really dig into that in the advanced scientism class. It's going to be coming in a number of weeks. But yeah, you've hit the nail on the head, Rebecca. Do I call you Becca?
Either.
Okay.
I go by Becca.
I call you
doesn't
either?
matter.
Okay. Dad joke. All right, so I'm even pulling from an atheist here. So David Hume, he's one of the biggest
Brilliant
critics.
dude.
Yeah, one of the biggest critics of the 17th century. States that nothing in the universe renders it necessary by definition. So we have to get the difference between necessary and contingent. Necessary means it could not be otherwise. It is what it is. Contingent means it could have been different. So we're going to get those definitions behind us, and nothing about the universe renders it necessary by definition, meaning it has to be contingent. The universe is contingent. It could be otherwise. It could have not been. It could have existed in another form. We have a very good reason for thinking that the universe isn't eternal and therefore not necessary, but finite and contingent, dependent on something else for its existence. And I'm cutting into this argument because before the Big Bang, it was commonly held belief that the universe was eternal and that it was necessary. You will hear old atheists saying the universe is all there is, and that's all that we have. I can't remember the quote exactly, but something along those terms. And so premise 3 is if every part of the universe is contingent, dealing with the second law of thermodynamics, which basically states that everything moves from a state of order to a state of disorder. So at some point in time, the universe was supremely ordered, which would be the Big Bang, and slowly moving to a state of disorder, which is what we see by our empirical sciences. So we're using the science against the arguments. We have excellent reason to conclude that the universe as a whole would be contingent rather than necessary. So it could have been otherwise, but we still run into the multiverse, yes, I know. And the universe's contingency implies a non-contingent, self-sustaining necessary cause external to it. So something external to this universe must have created it. So the other options we have are a multiverse, which in and of itself is contingent, or we have this simulation hypothesis, which just sounds like a roundabout way of saying God.
There's also a new school of thought now because, and this is good information, because the universe is basically 100 billion light years broad.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more elongated than it is, it's more oval shaped than it is circular shaped. The school of thought used to be that basically you would get out to the great nothing after you've reached the boundaries of the known, the observable universe.
Okay.
What they've discovered now, due to the Hubble telescope and that new one they just put out,
The James Webb Space
the James Webb, is that now they are able to deduce that the universe is expanding, and the universe is expanding on its fringes. Time is not, to us, it looks extremely slow, but out there on the fringes of the universe, it happens extremely fast. We observe it slowly, because time is relative in space. And so the universe, you actually are starting to see where some people are starting to believe that the universe might actually be infinite. So that's something, because of its expanding rate, it expands at an infinite. It could expand to be an infinite.
You're touching into what's called cyclical cosmology, probably coming from Roger Penrose. I was hoping somebody would bring this up. It's another type of a worldview that many people hold. It's actually really prominent in Eastern religions. As the world is created, destroyed, recreated, destroyed in a constant cycle. And this theory posits that once you get up to a certain level of expansion, time breaks down, and it becomes like the opposite of a creation. That the universe in and of itself becomes something like what goes on the inside of a black hole, and this black hole then becomes the birth of the next.
Or a white hole,
exactly. It becomes the white hole, which would have been the big
which
bang,
spews out new universes, I guess, basically.
So that's cyclical cosmology. It's not widely accepted, but it's something that's
like I said, it's like and it's something that's relatively new. I'm talking like within maybe even the past 5 years or so.
But once again, I want to go back to our nice atheist Sabina Hasselfelder, who says anything happens before that big bang. Yeah, exactly.
No, I'm just saying, but that's an argument you might actually run into. That way, people don't go in there ignorant.
I've actually read Penrose's book on the matter, so I'm familiar with it. So if you wanted to talk more about it, I'd love to talk more about it. I nerd up on that kind of stuff. But if you really want to nerd up on the countervening part, look up the idea of the horizon. It's the universe's horizon. The actual way we can actually see light. And it has some light coming to us dealing with the expansion of the universe, and it has some interesting. What do you call it? Interesting. I can't think of the word right now. Just
I can say this much.
The conclusions it draws are really weird.
Well, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna follow up if I can interrupt. So David Hume, an atheist, is actually supporting the idea that.
And this was 3 centuries before the Big Bang was posited.
So he's saying the universe is not eternal, and that there's an external cause or causation event outside the universe, like time and space.
Yes,
and all that.
and he was saying that when everybody said, "Oh, you're a fool. The universe is eternal. It's been around forever."
Yeah. No, you'll find a lot of atheists will actually they look at David Hume as almost he's a deity, but they'll agree with this too. But they look at that as a way that they can shut you down, because basically they agree. Because science explains that the universe is finite. It's not a god, or nothing has to exist outside of this for it to be finite. You see what I'm saying? So they'll actually use this as an argument for a case of no superpower or whatever.
It almost seems like that argument would have to come out of the understanding that God is in the universe, as opposed to the maker of the universe.
Hume's argument?
No, the thinking that Hume's argument debunks the existence of God.
Yeah, because, well, if God is not eternal.
Would come out of the.
I knew I'd find you
would
Yeah.
come out of the understanding that God is in the universe
Yeah.
as opposed to outside.
If God was in the universe, then he would be contingent too, so yeah. So anytime you premise a God within the universe, but you're not talking about our God, for one.
Right.
So,
Y'all didn't save any cookies for me?
He
ate them all.
He ate them all.
Seriously? Out of the 3 that you ate, you couldn't have saved me one.
Nope.
I think there might be some powder left in there.
Would you like to smell the bag?
Alright,
So when we come up on an atheist and they're saying, well, the universe is eternal and infinite, and then we can pull out, I'm gonna think like a card, right? Like a poker game card, like, haha, well, did you know that
Yeah.
David Hume, an atheist, said that the universe is not eternal or infinite, that it had taking it as like a beginning, right? A beginning to the universe.
yeah,
So that
Exactly.
you could use this to counter their argument of,
yeah, as long as they're not coming back at you with a multiverse or
Well, I don't even know what a
or
multiverse
cyclical,
is, so.
yeah, or
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
what's funny is that you brought it up earlier, I've actually heard, and then people laughed at that, I wish I could remember the name of the atheist, but he got up there and he was talking about, no, the Big Bang was started by a superior intelligent race of aliens,
Mhm.
and then he got done explaining it, next thing you know, the whole crowd is laughing.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
did you see that? You know what I'm
I've
talking
seen similar stuff, like concepts of like.
And there,
panspermia
and then the
or-
guy's like, yeah, you've just explained who we believe God is.
Yeah,
basically.
exactly.
And
Yeah,
it's
so.
like, no, it was superior aliens.
Yeah, I want the scientific explanation that includes God, but I don't want God in the equation. So,
Mhm.
yeah,
It's-
so is
it's
David
absolutely
Hume a
insane.
scientist or philosopher?
Philosophy.
back in those days, there were no distinction between the two, so
Oh.
he was actually both.
Oh,
He's a mathematician, scientist, philosopher. Yeah, they didn't separate science and philosophy didn't separate till the 19th century. So, and interestingly enough, bringing that up, I'm gonna nerd up. Science used to be called natural philosophy, and before that, it was called natural theology. Especially, yeah. So,
What's the theology?
yeah. And then we're talking about general revelation would have been the study of, natural theology would have been the study of general revelation, God's work through his creation. So even the scientism that people base their beliefs on is still founded in Christianity. No. So I think God, I love this. I don't even have to shift slides. We've already covered all this stuff. So the answer of God made the universe, who made God. So we got the concept we're talking about, science being the modern scientific discovery supports the beginning of the universe. We've talked about that. The universe's expansion, we've talked about that. How we can talk about how we found out about this through Hubble and our different space telescopes and the sort. Second law of thermodynamics. You run the math back. The universe couldn't be eternal because all the energy in the universe would have been used up, and we've used astronomy to discover the cosmic microwave background radiation, which actually...
I'm sorry, I have to. I find it absolutely amazing when science tries to explain things. First of all, they want to call the Earth 4.8 billion years old.
Mhm.
Yet they want to look at things out in the cosmos. They say is older than 4.8 billion years old.
Okay.
How in the world would we be seeing this?
They have an explanation for it.
I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be some sort of science of the
Yeah,
gaps.
and I know
because
we're dealing with
because radiation says so, you know. But
well, we'll get into that in when we're studying scientism and the purpose of scientific laws, the foundations of them, and the usefulness of them. But ultimately, it is, and I'm going to say this, inference to best explanations, and including, I'm going to push back at you, even certain Christian cosmologies are inferences to best explanations by pushing in what we can observe about the world by what we know through scriptural revelation. And I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to, as I've said, we're not pushing dogmas in this class, because I know we each hold our own view, but I'm going to teach you how to defeat me in my own standings here, right? So right now we want to stay on track, but I understand we're going to be dealing with the concept of science as being just nothing but a way of explaining that which can be observed.
I know I can't help that you don't believe the young Earth theory, which is actually the true
Yeah.
argument. But
Yeah, wait till I start tearing apart what you mean by true.
I have questions. So, the universe is expanding. Okay, I understand those words.
Mm-hmm.
Second law of thermodynamics. So it means thermodynamics means all usable energy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right, so I'm with you. But then what does cosmic microwave background radiation have to do with the other two premises?
Under the current scientific theories, to make Pharaoh happy, it is the furthest back that our scientific instruments can see that backs up all of the claims made in the Big Bang Theory. So it, in essence, proves scientifically the Big Bang Theory, and that's why it's thrown in there. It's, I can go through the whole background of where it was discovered, everything else like that, but it's about as far back as we can see with all of our telescopes, whether they be radio telescopes, infrared, microwave, and this is in the microwave band, so this is as far back as we can see in time.
Okay,
Under
so
current scientific theory.
In simpler terms, how would you answer this question?
Which question? If God made the universe, who made God?
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah, that is it. In simple terms. Well, if there was somebody who made God, then that would be God.
Mm-hmm.
And if they made that God, then that would be God. So you're just getting the concept of a regress. So the idea we talked about it 2 arguments ago is for everything that has to be caused, there has to be somebody that caused it. So if something else caused that, then under what we know as who God is, then that would be God. So all you're doing is you're kicking the can further down the road. You're not really answering the question. You're just wanting to say, okay, I'm not wanting to stick with you with this premise that an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving, somebody who exists out of space and time, created the universe. Because the moment you say somebody else could create him, then you're just taking all the definitions that we have for God and moving that over to that next person, which still collapses down to being God.
Mm-hmm.
So would an appropriate response be, who made God? No one made God. God has always existed. And God exists outside of the time and the space that we understand it to be.
Yes,
Right,
yes.
so sooner or later you have to believe in an original, whether that's a being or matter or whatever, you have to believe in something that was there before everything else. And people can say, well, maybe infinitely, but the thing is, like, the furthest back you can push that is, we believe in a being or something that existed before time. But in order for things to move, time has to exist. And so then at that point, you're believing in a God that can work outside of time, or something that has created time. At that point, you're believing in a God.
Yeah. All the qualifications for what it would take to create this universe,
Right.
all equate to being God.
As our former pastor used to say, we can't prove everything because faith is always going to be there. That has to be the faith.
Yeah.
So there's certain mysteries we can never explain.
Yeah.
But we can assure someone that we do not have a blind faith, because there are many things that can be that are factual, that are tangible. But I think we have to be upfront and honest and say, no, there's some things I can't explain because they're mysteries.
No, what we're taking is circumstantial evidence and turning it and making an argument.
You're making a cogent argument for what you can.
Well, yeah, for all the circumstantial evidence that's out there.
And then there's some things we can't
You can
make
even
an
use-
argument for.
You could even use the witness of your life-changing experience through salvation. For instance, you were once this for no explainable reason other than your faith in Christ. You are now this, and it happened instantaneously. So, I mean, even Jesus states, look, it's and you can, and this still holds true through the journalistic method of evidence, especially as far as it pertains to this, a criminal use of circumstantial evidence. you have the witness of your testimony, you have the historicity of Christ, and then you have the Word of God. I mean, there alone are three witnesses. You also have the God showing his divine ability of creation through nature. I mean, this could go on.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, I see you've read Lee Stroke, which is awesome, but what I'm trying to, this is gonna be another case of what we're working with here is diagnosis and remedy, right? You're talking about remedy, which is exactly where we wanna get to, but first we gotta get the person to diagnose, oh, I personally have like a set of beliefs that aren't consistent. So we use this cosmological argument against them as you push back about why you have faith in, like, so you believe in the multiverse, what made the multiverse, another multiverse, and so on and so forth. You get them, you get them to understand the fact that they put the same level of faith in these presuppositions as they accuse us of putting in our faith in God and his divine revelation through scripture. If you undermine their arguments, that will open them up at that point from the remedy, is what we're talking about here. So we have to first be able to drill under. So it looks like we're running a little late tonight.
It's 8:30.
Okay, well, we're only halfway through, so I'm gonna ask you all a proposition here. I was going to first ask if y'all wanted to take next week off, being that it's spring break. But we're only halfway through the class, so that means we still got another half of class to go through. So at that point in time,